now call Keith Brown to be followed by Carol Mochen in around 6 minutes. Mr Brown.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I associate myself with many of the remarks that have been made around the Chamber, much of which I agree with, and I'll try not to repeat too much the points already made. But in particular, I of course agree with the terms of the First Minister's motion. I also agree with the amendment proposed by the Labour Party. I think in particular Polly McNeill spoke very forcefully, and I would pay testament to her long experience in these matters, as I would to her former colleague in the gallery, Sandra White, as well. One thing I think does have to be repeated is that these attacks, the attacks carried out on the 7th of October, were beyond words, and they should be condemned. And I'm confident all MSPs across the Chamber will join together to condemn these horrific attacks. There is nothing that could justify the brutality that we paid witness to on that day. I would also want to say, though, that I think it's entirely right this Chamber is discussing this, and it's come under attack, as have the demonstrations and the various activities around the country, as we are not going to make any difference anyway. And I think that's a counsel of despair. I think the demonstrations which have been held, people writing letters, making their voices known, is extremely important. And I don't believe diplomats and those around the world that have the ability to change this are immune to hearing from populations about how abhorrent we believe what is currently happening actually is. So I think it's entirely right this Chamber should discuss, should debate and should decide on this motion. I think it's currently believed that between 11,000 and I think, as Kokab Stewart said, 13,000 Gazans have since been killed since the 7th of October. And according to the Palestinian Ministry of Health, and I appreciate that sources are very difficult to verify, but these statistics have been independently verified by the UN, which has also not cast any significant doubt on either of those figures at this current time. And we can also look to specific attacks as examples of what's been referred to by some members as the disproportionate nature of the response, like the successive attacks on the Jabalia refugee camp in the north of the Gaza Strip. There have been a wide range of reports on the exact number of casualties from the attacks on that camp, but we do know for certain that it's in the hundreds of Palestinian refugees that have been injured and dozens killed, possibly far more than that, in attacks on that camp over the past few weeks, which has been justified, I am told, by saying they were targeting one particular Hamas commander. You cannot justify the murder of dozens, maybe hundreds of people to attack one person. It's, as the First Minister said, collateral damage is not an acceptable way of dealing with these things, and as international law upholds. Can I say the vital distinction between those of us, I think, that agree largely on one side of the Chamber and the Conservative position, and I agreed with all the areas of concern that Donald Cameron listed towards the end of his speech. But the main point of disagreement is on an immediate ceasefire. I think I heard Sandish Gulhani say that they couldn't call for a ceasefire, but he thinks there should be a ceasefire that everyone should adhere to. And the reason now given for not calling for a ceasefire, as I understand it, is because Hamas said they wouldn't observe it. Why should we be intimidated by terrorists in not calling for a ceasefire? And if Edward Mountain was here, I'm sure he'd agree that it's quite often the case when two military forces oppose each other, it can be in one's interest to have a ceasefire. If I can just finish making this point, first of all, I'll come to Jackson Carlo. If both sides agree a ceasefire, it can often be the case that one side gains an advantage for that, and I understand that point. But in this case, we're talking about civilians, innocent people that are caught between the two military forces. That's why there should be an immediate ceasefire. I'll give way to Jackson Carlo.
Jackson Carlo.
I think the answer to Mr Brown's point is that given that Hamas has said it won't observe a ceasefire, there is a belief by Israel that this motion, when passed, and this campaign for a ceasefire will be meant to lead to a unilateral ceasefire by Israel. They will be held to the standard of unilaterally ceasefiring, notwithstanding the fact that the other side does not. That is the issue at all of this.
Keith Brown, I can give you the time back.
If that's the case, why would that stop us calling for an immediate ceasefire? I understand the point Jackson Carlo's making, and I think Anis Sarwar made some points about the statements from Benjamin Netanyahu, which cast doubts on whether he is keen on a ceasefire as well. That should not stop us from saying this is wrong. The people being killed just now currently are innocent people, and it should stop. And it shouldn't be conditional. It should stop now. Of course, I believe the hostages should be returned immediately. I think that's only the right thing to do. And of course, there's not a war in history that I can bring to mind where it hasn't ended with a treaty. And there's one particular other point I wanted to make, and that is about the fact that this really has to be if the one thing that can come out of this is a real, genuine attempt to get to a two-state solution so that both Israel and Palestine can live in peace and security. And I think the failures to do that have been laid out by Paul McNeill and others over many years. But I think this has to be a prompt to renew with real vigour and serious intent the efforts to try and achieve that solution. The one thing I would say is that to all motions, if we can support the motion and stand united, that we can make a very powerful statement today, that we stand for peace. I'm quite fond of quoting Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the French philosopher, when he said that peace is found also in dungeons. It's also true that peace is found in graveyards. Now, the point is we cannot have a peaceful solution until Palestine is both free and secure. It's not a dungeon, it's not an imprisoned place, it's not an occupied place, and that the people there, as in Israel, can be free from the threat of being attacked from bombs and rockets and bullets. So I think if we can try and unite around that fact that we want to see that happen, if we can make that the focus beyond a ceasefire, which will save, if we can achieve it, and I know this Parliament can't, but if we can achieve a ceasefire, that will save countless lives and injuries, and some of the horrendous anecdotes we've heard about people without parents, without limbs and so on today, we can stop that. But if we can then agree to move on and encourage all those involved to move towards a real peace, both for the people of Palestine and the people of Israel. I support the motion in the name of the First Minister.
Thank you, Mr Brown. I now call